My mom begged me to come home for the holidays. I am Madison, and at 31 years old, I was still enough of an idiot to think this Christmas might be different. Jennifer called me in Boston at 3 in the morning, sobbing on FaceTime about how the family never sees me and how they all needed me there. 10 hours on a cramped flight, 2 layovers, and a dead phone battery later, I finally showed up on the doorstep of our family estate in Charleston, with a suitcase full of gifts for my brother's kids. My back was killing me, and I smelled like stale airplane coffee, but I rang that bell with my heart pounding, stupidly hoping she would hug me. The door flew open. There was no hello, no hug, and no, "How was your flight?" My mother just stared at my suitcase and spoke like she was reading from a grocery list. "You will be babysitting Matthew's children," she said. "The rest of us are leaving for a family trip in an hour. Drop a comment and let me know where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. I would love to know who is part of our community." I walked into the entryway of our Charleston estate, the wheels of my suitcase clicking against the cold marble floors. This house always smelled the same, a mixture of expensive furniture polish and a lingering, suffocating dust that no amount of cleaning could ever fully erase. My mother did not even offer to take my coat. Instead, she reached into the pocket of her silk robe and handed me a 3-page, color-coded printout. It was a nanny schedule. Every hour of the next 7 days was accounted for: school pickups, soccer practices, organic meal prep, and bedtime stories for my brother's 2 children. Jennifer did not look at me as I took the paper. She was too busy checking her reflection in the gilded mirror by the door. "We are celebrating your father's and my 35th anniversary, Madison," she said. "It is a major family milestone. Matthew and his wife need this break, and you always say we should take care of ourselves." I looked at the schedule, then at the heavy silence of the house. I had flown across the ocean because she told me the family was falling apart without me. I realized then that she did not mean they missed my presence. She meant the gears of their comfortable life had stopped turning because I was not there to grease them with my labor. Matthew stepped into the hallway then, wearing a pair of designer sunglasses and a watch that probably cost more than my first 2 years of college tuition combined, a watch I had indirectly paid for when I bailed him out of his last failed business venture. He smirked at me, his arms loaded with high-end luggage. "Hey kids," he called out to Mia and Logan, who were currently using my legs as a jungle gym. "Do not wipe your snot on the jet-lagged servant. She has been in Boston too long. She has forgotten how to handle real work." My father, Michael, did not even look up from his phone as he walked past me toward the driveway. He just muttered something about making sure I did not let the kids near his woodshop. They all laughed. It was that sharp, collective sound of people who know they have a safety net and are not afraid to jump. For a split second, the old Madison, the one who lived on stupid hope, wanted to scream. But the Madison who had become an elite architect remained cold. I have spent my entire career building landscapes that breathe for people who can afford my vision, but in this house, I was always the one bearing the rubble of their bad decisions. Why didn't I just walk out? It is what psychologists call the invisible chains of the survivor. It is a house of cards built during a childhood where love was a currency I never had enough of. I had been parentified since I was 12 years old, making sure Matthew's homework was done and his lunch was packed, while my parents focused on their own social standing. I was the responsible one, which in this family was just another word for the one who pays. I had been in a cage with the door wide open for years, but my feet were nailed to the floor by the belief that if I just did one more favor, if I just sent one more wire transfer, they would finally see me as a person rather than a resource. I looked at the nanny's schedule again, my eyes scanning the fine print of their entitlement. I was not a daughter to them. I was a subscription service they had been overdrawing for a decade. I looked at Jennifer, who was now complaining that the car was not packed fast enough. My compassion had been a luxury they had overdrafted for far too long. I did not cry. I did not argue. I just smiled, a thin, clinical smile that should have terrified them. I followed them into the kitchen where their glossy itinerary was laid out. It was time for an audit. We moved into the dining room, a space dominated by a heavy mahogany table that had seen generations of Millers pretend to be more prestigious than they actually were. Jennifer was hovering over her phone, showing Matthew photos of the luxury yacht they had booked for the Atlantic cruise. "It is an $8,500 private charter, Madison," she said, her voice airy, as if the money had simply materialized from the clouds. "We finally have a real vacation planned, and since you are here to handle the home front, we can actually relax." Michael nodded, pouring himself a glass of wine that I had likely funded through one of his many business shortfall requests. I did not sit down. I stood at the end of the table and set my laptop down. "I am not babysitting," I said. The room went quiet, the kind of silence that happens right before a storm breaks. Matthew let out a short, annoyed huff. "Madison, seriously, do not start this now. We have a flight in less than 2 hours." I ignored his tone. I was an architect who designed structures to last, while he was the man who had spent his life leaning on a foundation he did not build. I opened the lid of my laptop. The screen glowed, illuminating a spreadsheet I had titled, "The Hollow Heritage Audit." I turned it around so they could all see the columns of red and black. "Before you go anywhere, we're going to talk about accounting," I said. Anger was not loud this time. It was clinical. Jennifer reached for her wine, her hand trembling slightly as she saw the first page. "Madison, honey, you are being so dramatic. We have been under so much stress." "This is not drama," I replied. "It is a balance sheet." I scrolled to the bottom line, highlighted in bold, inescapable black. "In the last 48 months, I have sent $135,000 to this household." The number sat there, undeniable. Matthew leaned in, the color draining from his face as he recognized the entries under his name. He saw the $2,500 for a failed e-commerce launch and the $3,000 for car payments he claimed he forgot to make. Every monthly shortfall, every emergency wire transfer for a broken water heater that somehow turned into a luxury brunch post the next day, it was all there. I pointed to a row from last winter. "Michael, you told me the construction firm was on the brink of collapse, and you needed $15,000 for payroll." 3 days later, Matthew was wearing that new designer watch. I looked at my mother, who was staring at a screenshot of a text she had sent me sobbing about being unable to afford groceries, juxtaposed with a receipt from her favorite high-end nail salon dated for that same afternoon. I realized then that I had not been an investor in this family. I had been a subscription they had been overdrawing for years. This was not a family meeting. It was a forensic audit of a legacy built on theft. "I am not your safety net," I said. "I am the person who finally decided to stop bleeding, so you could live in luxury." They were not shocked by what they had done. They were shocked that I had stopped playing along. Michael slammed his hand onto the mahogany table, making the wine glasses rattle and the silverware jump. "You are talking about family debt as if we are some business clients, Madison," he barked, his face turning a deep, dangerous shade of purple. "I am your father. I raised you in this house. You do not put a price tag on loyalty." Jennifer let out a choked sob, clutching her silk robe tighter to her chest, as if I were the one physically attacking her. "This is cruel, Madison. After everything we have been through, after all the stress of keeping this family together, you come here to humiliate us? You are punishing your own mother because I wanted one afternoon at a nail salon to feel like a human being again." I did not blink. I did not raise my voice. I just looked at them with the same detached precision I used when a contractor tried to substitute cheap stone for the granite I had specified in a landscape design. My father was not raging because I was wrong. He was raging because the person who used to stay silent had finally started speaking in the language of numbers. Jennifer was not crying because her heart was broken. She was crying because the curtain had been pulled back on her performance. You see, Michael and Jennifer had not just been spending my money. They had been wearing it as an identity. This is the classic illusion of power from an empty wallet. When an entire family builds its sense of self on a status they have not earned, their authority becomes a rented costume. They believe they are powerful because they have the stuff, but the stuff was mine. They had mistaken my bank balance for their own social standing. Without my invisible paycheck propping them up, they were not the prestigious Millers of Charleston. They were just people living in a house they could not afford, shouting at a daughter they had already lost. Matthew leaned over the table, trying to grab my laptop, but I snapped the lid shut before his fingers could touch it. "You think you are so smart with your spreadsheets," he hissed, his sarcasm finally replaced by raw panic. "But you forgot one thing. The yacht is booked. The flights are set. We are leaving, and you are staying here. There is nothing your little accounting project can do to stop that." I leaned back in the heavy chair, feeling the cool air of the dining room on my skin. "That brings me to the next item on the audit," I said, my voice as cold as the marble in the entryway. "Michael, you might want to sit down." "You too, Jennifer." I pulled my phone from my pocket and turned it toward them. "I recognized the card number on your confirmation email for that $8,500 yacht charter. It was my secondary business card, the one I authorized for emergency household repairs 3 years ago." Jennifer's eyes went wide, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "3 days ago, from my office in Boston, I called the charter company and the airline." I continued. "Since the bookings were made with my card and my account, I had every legal right to manage the reservations. The yacht package has been refunded in full to my business account. The flight credits have been moved. So, when I told you at the door that I was not babysitting while you went on vacation, I was not making a request. I was stating a fact. There is no vacation anymore. Not on my dime. Not ever again." Michael lurched up from his chair scraping violently against the tile. "You had no right," he screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Those are our tickets. Those are our plans." I did not flinch. "They were bought with my money, from my account, with my labor," I said. "The right was entirely mine. And we're not done yet. Not by a long shot." I walked out of that dining room, the silence behind me heavy enough to choke on. Michael was still frozen by the table, his pointing finger trembling, while Jennifer's sobbing had transitioned from dramatic to desperate. I did not look back. I wheeled my suitcase across the marble, through the front door, and out into the humid Charleston night. I did not call a taxi to a hotel. Instead, I drove 15 minutes to a glass high-rise downtown, to the one-bedroom condo I had purchased 6 months ago in total secrecy. The condo smelled like fresh paint and new beginnings. There were no dusty family heirlooms here, no ghosts of parentified expectations. It was a space I had built for myself, paid for with my own commissions, intended as my eventual escape pod. Tonight, that escape had become permanent. I sat on the floor of my barely furnished living room and opened my laptop again. This was not a breakdown. It was a transition from family drama to a professional audit. The next morning, I met with my attorney in a quiet office overlooking the harbor. I had already sent over 3 years of bank statements, transfers, and that formality paperwork Michael had convinced me to sign years ago. My attorney did not offer platitudes or sympathy. She offered facts. "Madison," she said, placing a thick folder on the desk, "the co-borrower status on the family estate is only the surface. Your father has been using your credit profile as a secondary life support system for his failing construction business for years." I looked at the documents. It was worse than I had imagined. Michael had not just used my money for emergency repairs. He had opened 3 unauthorized lines of credit in my name, totaling over $45,000, to prop up a business that was effectively a shell. Jennifer had been the one signing off as a witness, essentially facilitating the identity theft of her own daughter. My compassion had been a resource they did not just spend, they had strip-mined it. This was not about a vacation or a nanny schedule anymore. It was about legal architecture. I authorized my attorney to file a formal request for a forensic accounting audit of all accounts associated with my Social Security number. We also drafted a cease and desist letter regarding any further use of my credit. The family meeting in the dining room had been my final attempt at a private resolution. Now, the conversation would happen through certified mail and legal representatives. I felt a cold, clinical clarity. I had spent my life designing landscapes that were structural and sound, and I realized I had to apply that same structural integrity to my boundaries. Love had been a subscription I had been footing the bill for, and I was finally hitting the cancel button on the entire contract. I was not the daughter they used to know. I was the silent investor who was finally calling in the debt. The lawyer, a woman whose eyes were as sharp as the crease in her suit, did not look up as I sat down. She just slid a single, yellow-tabbed folder across the mahogany desk. "This is the kill shot, Madison," she said. I opened it, expecting more credit card statements or perhaps another unauthorized loan. Instead, I saw a deed. It was for the 12 acres of coastal land my grandmother had left to me in her will. The one place I had planned to build my own legacy. The date on the sale was from 2 years ago. The price was $75,000. My breath caught in my throat, not from sadness, but from the sheer audacity of the theft. I looked at the signature line. My name was written there in a perfect, practiced cursive. But as a landscape architect, I spent my days analyzing patterns. I knew the weight of my own hand. This signature was too deliberate, too slow. I could see the slight tremor in the loops, a characteristic of my mother's handwriting when she was anxious. "Matthew found the developer," my attorney explained. "And Jennifer provided the authorization. They did not just drain your bank account, Madison. They liquidated your future to pay off Matthew's gambling debts and failed business ventures. They did not even leave you the soil beneath your feet." I felt a strange, cold silence settle over my mind. The betrayal was no longer just a series of favors or misunderstandings. It was a felony. They had reached into the one part of my life that was sacred, the inheritance from the only woman who had ever truly loved me, and they had sold it for scrap. My compassion had been a door I left unlocked, and they had walked in and stripped the house bare. "But there is more," the lawyer continued, her voice gaining a lethal edge. "Because Michael used your identity to secure that business line of credit, and because he defaulted on the repayment schedule 3 months ago, the bank initiated a structured takeover. However, since we proved the signature on the land sale was forged, the funds used to prop up the estate mortgage are now considered part of a criminal restitution claim." She slid a second document toward me. This one had the bank's official seal. "In practice, Madison, because you have been the sole payer on record for the mortgage shortfalls for 4 years, and because the original loan was obtained through fraudulent means involving your identity, the title has been transferred to the holding trust we established yesterday." I stared at the paper. The address was the family estate in Charleston. The names Michael and Jennifer Miller had been crossed out. In their place was my name, Madison Miller, sole owner. The realization hit me with the force of a falling structure. I did not just own the debt anymore. I owned the dirt. I owned the marble floors. I owned the entryway where they had laughed at me for being a servant. This was not a family dispute anymore. It was an eviction. Every bridge they had built with my money had just been demolished. There was no path back to stupid hope. There was only the balance sheet, and for the first time in my life, the numbers were finally on my side. I closed the folder and stood up. I did not feel like a victim. I felt like an owner. The doorbell of my new condo rang at 6 in the evening. It was not the polite, rhythmic chime of a guest. It was the frantic, uneven hammering of people who had finally realized the floor had fallen out from under them. I did not check the intercom. I already knew the scent of that desperation. Through the heavy oak door, I could hear Jennifer's voice, stripped of its usual airy condescension. "Madison, please," she sobbed, her words muffled by the wood. "Open the door. We know you are in there. Everything is falling apart." I stood in my kitchen, pouring a glass of cold water, my movements precise and mechanical. I did not feel the surge of guilt I had carried for 30 years. I did not feel the urge to open the door and make it all go away. I felt like a creditor watching a bad investment finally hit zero. Michael's voice joined hers, but the bark was gone. It was replaced by a hollow, gravelly plea. "Madison, they're going to arrest Matthew," he said. "The developer is filing criminal charges for the land sale. We need $8,500 for a retainer just to stop the warrant. Please, Madison. He is your brother." I walked to the door, but I did not touch the handle. I looked at the shadow of their feet through the gap at the bottom. Family loyalty had always been a one-way transaction in this house, and I was finally closing the account. "You did not just spend my money," I said, my voice quiet but carrying through the door with lethal clarity. "You stole my dirt. You forged my name to sell the one thing that actually belonged to me." Matthew did not just make a mistake. He committed a felony. And you both watched him do it. Jennifer's hammering increased. We will pay you back, I swear. We will sell the jewelry, the cars, anything. Just save him this one last time. You are the only one who can. I reached into the folder I had brought back from my lawyer's office. I pulled out a single sheet of paper, the legal eviction notice for the Charleston estate. I did not say a word. I simply slid the document through the thin space between the door and the floor. I watched the white paper disappear under the door like a silent executioner. The hammering stopped. I heard the sound of the paper being picked up, the crinkle of Michael's shaking hands. "What is this?" he whispered. "It is an eviction notice, Michael," I said. "Because the original loan was fraudulent, and because I have been the sole payer for 48 months, the bank has transferred the title to my holding trust. You have 30 days to vacate. I am not the bank anymore. I am the owner." The silence that followed was the heaviest thing I had ever heard. There were no more pleas for Matthew. No more talk of anniversary milestones. Just the slow, shuffling sound of two people realizing that the safety net they had spent a decade shredding was finally gone. I heard Jennifer make a choked, broken sound, and then their footsteps retreated down the hallway, fading into the hum of the building. That night, for the first time in my life, I slept without the weight of their debt pressing against my ribs. Over the next few months, the architecture of my life changed. The family estate was sold to a preservation society. Matthew took a plea deal for the forgery, resulting in 2 years of supervised probation and a permanent criminal record that effectively ended his dreams of being a high-end entrepreneur. Michael and Jennifer moved into a small, rented apartment on the outskirts of the city, living on the modest Social Security Michael had tried so hard to hide from the bank. They stopped texting me about emergencies. The ATM was permanently out of service. I took the $75,000 recovered from the land fraud and established the Heritage Restoration Fund. As a landscape architect, I knew that some structures are too rotten to save. You have to tear them down to the soil before anything healthy can grow. I used the money to design and build a community garden on the very plot of land they had tried to steal. It was not about punishment. It was about creation. True justice is not just the destruction of the people who hurt you. It is what you plant in the ruins they left behind. I stood in that garden on a crisp Charleston morning, the smell of fresh earth and blooming jasmine replacing the dust of the old estate. I looked at the rows of seedlings, their roots digging deep into the ground that was finally, legally mine. I realized then that my compassion had not been a weakness. It was a resource I just had not known how to budget. Now I was finally the architect of my own peace. The balance sheet was settled. The heritage was no longer hollow. If you have ever been treated like a resource instead of a person by your own family, share the story. It is time we all stop paying for seats at tables where we are not welcome.